What would you do if the man you loved vanished overnight and the one person you trusted most was the reason he left? My name is Caroline Whitfield. I'm 36 years old, and until 8 months ago, I believed I had built a life worth being proud of. I was the CEO of Whitfield Properties, one of the largest real estate firms in the Midwest, a company valued at over $3 billion. My name had been on the cover of Forbes. Business journalists called me a visionary. But none of that ever felt like mine, because the empire I was running, my father built it first. Gerald Whitfield was not a man who lost. He started with nothing, a single rental property in South Chicago, a notebook full of contacts, and a will that most people don't have the words to describe. By the time I was old enough to understand what he'd built, it was already enormous. He handed me the keys when I turned 30, and the world applauded. What the world didn't see was the weight that came with those keys and the invisible conditions attached to them. I met Ethan Mercer on a job site inspection 3 years before any of this happened. He was a construction technician, crouched over a set of blueprints, paint still drying on his forearm. He looked up when I walked by and smiled, not the practiced smile people give when they recognize my last name, but a real one, easy and unguarded. He had no idea who I was, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like just a person, not a brand, not a billion-dollar surname, just a woman standing in the afternoon sun. We dated for a year before I said yes. The wedding was small, exactly what I wanted. My father sat at the front table with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. On the drive home that night, he said nothing about the ceremony. He only said, "I hope you know what you're doing, Caroline." I told him I did. I was wrong about a lot of things back then, but not about Ethan. 8 years of marriage. A daughter named Sophia, 5 years old. With her father's laugh and her mother's stubbornness, Ethan fixed things around the house with his own hands. He remembered every small detail. Sophia's favorite color changed 4 times, and he kept up with every single one. But at every family dinner inside my father's house, the air felt different, tense, measured. One evening, my father turned to a table full of guests and referred to Ethan as our very skilled tradesman. The room laughed politely. Under the table, I felt Ethan's hand close into a fist against his knee. He never said a word. He never did, and I told myself that silence was strength. I told myself love was enough to hold everything together. I was wrong. I told myself the tension at those dinners was just my father's way, cold, controlling, impossible to please. But 3 weeks before my world fell apart, he showed me exactly what he was capable of. It was a Tuesday evening after another strained family dinner, and as Ethan drove home with Sophia asleep in the back seat, my father asked me to stay. "Just for a moment," he said. I followed him down the hallway into his private study, a room that always smelled of aged oak and cigar smoke, where the lamp on his desk cast a heavy amber light across his face and left everything else in shadow. He didn't sit. He reached into the desk drawer and placed a thick folder on the table in front of me. Inside were documents, a biography, financial records, a photograph. The man's name was Preston Cole, son of my father's oldest business partner. "He's the right fit, Caroline," my father said, his voice perfectly even. "The kind of partnership that would take Whitfield Properties national." I didn't touch the folder. I slid it back across the desk. "I already have a husband, Dad." He didn't raise his voice. He never did. And somehow, that was always worse. He simply looked at me and said, "Love doesn't show up on a balance sheet." I stood to leave, and just before I reached the door, he added one more line, quiet, almost gentle. "I only want what's best for you, but if you won't choose for yourself, I'll have to help you choose." I told myself it was just pressure, just words. I didn't understand what he meant, Not yet. 3 weeks later, I came home to a house that had been emptied of everything that mattered. It was a Wednesday night in late October. Rain came down hard against the Chicago streets, and I didn't get home until nearly 11 after a brutal investor meeting that had stretched for hours. I stepped through the front door and felt it immediately, the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that tells you something is wrong before your mind catches up. Sophia didn't come running. No television, no smell of dinner, no sound at all. My eyes went straight to the living room table, where a single white envelope sat under the lamp, my name written on it in Ethan's handwriting. My hands went cold before I even opened it. Inside were divorce papers signed, notarized, already complete. I called his phone. It rang once and cut to silence, like someone had ended the call. I called again, disconnected. I called our neighbor, and she told me she had seen Ethan leave around 8 that evening, Sophia asleep against his shoulder, a backpack on his back, walking toward a car she didn't recognize. I stood in the middle of that room with the rain beating against the windows and my phone still in my hand, and I could not move. I could not cry. I just stood there while the whole night collapsed around me. My father arrived at 7 the next morning without calling first. He walked through the door, looked at the papers still sitting on the table, and exhaled slowly. "So it's done," he said. I turned to face him. "Did you know about this?" He picked up the envelope, turned it over once, and said, "You should sign these, Caroline. Sooner rather than later." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw something behind his eyes that wasn't grief, wasn't worry, wasn't even discomfort. It was something that looked terrifyingly close to relief. That look cut through me like broken glass. I reached over and pushed the papers away from him. "I'm not signing anything." The man I loved was gone. But it was my father's face in that moment, that quiet, satisfied calm that broke something in me I didn't know could break. I refused to sign those papers, and that refusal cost me more than I ever expected. In the weeks that followed, I hired 2 private investigators separately, neither knowing about the other. Both came back with nothing. No phone activity, no credit card transactions, no rental agreements, no forwarding address. Ethan had disappeared so completely it was as if he had decided to stop existing. My father called every week. Sometimes it was him directly, voice measured and patient, telling me I was only hurting myself. Other times it was his attorney, leaving voicemails about asset division and legal timelines. I let every single one go unanswered. Then in the 3rd month, the first investigator called with something, a lead. A man registered under the name E. Morris had signed on with a construction crew working a commercial build in a suburb outside Street Louis. The physical description matched. When the investigator drove out there the following morning, the foreman said the man had quit 2 days prior. No notice, no forwarding contact. Ethan had moved again. He was always one step ahead, and I didn't understand how not yet. One evening around the 5th month, I was going through a kitchen drawer looking for a pen when I found a small folded piece of paper tucked beneath a stack of takeout menus. I opened it and recognized Ethan's handwriting immediately. It was a to-do list he had written before Sophia's last birthday: strawberry cake, fix the backyard swing, pick up more pink candles. 3 simple things. I sat down on the kitchen floor right there and didn't get up for a long time. It was the first time I had cried since the night he left. I stayed on that floor until the room went dark, and then I got up, washed my face, and kept going. I did not sign the papers. 8 months after that rainy October night, I drove out to inspect a large residential development. Whitfield Properties was funding on the edge of Indianapolis, one of our biggest ongoing projects. It was a pale winter morning, cold enough that my breath showed in the air, and the site smelled of wet concrete and iron dust. The project manager walked beside me, going over timelines, but I wasn't fully listening. My eyes moved out of habit now, scanning every face and every crowd the way they had learned to do without me asking them to. We were passing the ground-level pour when something pulled my attention to a group of workers to the left. One man had his back to me. It was the set of his shoulders, the slight tilt of his head when the man beside him said something, small details that shouldn't have meant anything. I stopped walking. "Give me a second," I said quietly. The project manager assumed I had a question about the structure. I was already moving. My heels pressed into the soft ground with each step, the distance between us closing faster than I realized. The man turned. The cement bag on his shoulder slipped and hit the ground with a heavy thud. It was Ethan. His hair was longer, his face leaner, his hands rough and darkened from months of outdoor labor, but his eyes were the same eyes I had looked into the morning we got married. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. Then a worker nearby stepped forward and said, "You okay, Mercer?" And hearing that name out loud, his real name, unchanged, something cracked open in my chest. He hadn't disappeared into someone else. He was still Ethan Mercer. I closed the last few steps between us, and before I could stop myself, I slapped him. The sound cut clean through the noise of the sight. He didn't step back. He didn't raise his hands. He just looked at me, no anger, no defense, no explanation, only exhaustion, and something beneath it that looked quietly and painfully like relief. The slap still hung in the air between us when the project manager quietly gestured for the crew to move to the other side of the site. Within a minute, Ethan and I were standing alone in a far corner of the construction yard, the noise of the machines a distant blur, winter wind cutting slow and cold across the open ground. I had 8 months of questions locked inside me and no idea which one to ask first. So I just looked at him and waited. Ethan took a slow breath, looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at me. He told me that the night before he left, my father had come to our house. Not to the front door, to the garage, where Ethan had been working late. Gerald arrived without warning, 2 men in dark suits standing just behind him, and said nothing for the first few seconds. He simply set a phone down on the workbench, screen facing up. On it was a video Sophia, filmed from a distance, playing in the yard of her preschool that same afternoon. No camera shaking, no noise, just a clean and deliberate shot of a 5-year-old girl who had no idea she was being watched. Gerald let Ethan look at it long enough to understand what it meant. Then he said, "You are a stain on this family's name. Sign the papers and disappear, or that little girl will never know a peaceful day." Ethan had no attorney, no leverage, no one who could stand between him and a man with the resources my father had. "I knew you could protect yourself," Ethan said quietly, his voice barely above the wind. "But Sophia couldn't." I asked him why he never told me, and he looked at me the way someone looks when they've already thought through every version of an answer. "Your father told me that if you found out, he would know. He said he had people close to you." Something cold moved through me when he said that. I thought about the 2 investigators I had hired, how the first one lost the trail in Street Louis just days after filing his initial report, how the second one stopped returning my calls after week 2. I had assumed incompetence. Now I understood. Ethan had sent Sophia to his younger sister Diana in Nashville the night he left somewhere Gerald had no reach, no connection, no reason to look. For 8 months, he had worked under the name E. Morris and moved to a new site every 6 weeks, staying invisible just long enough to keep our daughter safe. Standing there in that open yard, I went through everything my father had told me in those 8 months. That Ethan left because he couldn't handle the pressure of our life, that a man like him was never built for a marriage like ours, that he had almost certainly found someone else, and I needed to accept it and move forward. Every single word had been a lie. constructed carefully and delivered calmly by the one person I had trusted without condition my entire life. I remembered the last dinner the three of us ever had together at my father's house. Sophia had looked up from her plate midway through and asked, "Where's Daddy going to be next weekend?" And my father had simply taken another bite and said nothing. I had thought it was indifference. Now I knew it was something far worse. "I didn't leave you," Ethan said again, his voice steady but rough at the edges. "I left so that you and Sophia would still be standing when this was over." The wind moved through the sight. I didn't cry. I had moved past the place where tears were enough. Something harder and quieter had taken their place, a decision forming in the back of my mind that I hadn't spoken aloud yet, but already knew I would follow through on. My father believed he had won. He had no idea that the truth, no matter how carefully buried, had just found its way back into the light. I left that construction site knowing exactly what I had to do, and I gave myself 1 week to do it right. I pulled phone records, travel logs, and every document I could access through my own private attorney. Not my father's legal team, not anyone connected to Whitfield Properties, but a lawyer I contacted on my own who confirmed within 48 hours that what my father had done carried serious legal weight. I reached out to Diana in Nashville, and she gave a full account of the night Ethan arrived at her door. How he looked, what he said, the state Sophia was in when he handed her over. I gathered everything quietly, told no one, and when Ethan asked what I was planning, I looked at him and said only, "Trust me." He didn't push for more. He just nodded. My father hosted his end-of-quarter gathering at the family estate on Lakeshore Drive on a Friday evening in late November. The house was exactly as I remembered it: tall ceilings, warm chandelier light, the low murmur of Chicago's most powerful names moving through every room. Preston Cole was already seated beside my father when I arrived. Navy suit, the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having had to fight for anything. My father stood near the center of the room and raised his glass slightly when he saw me walk in. "Tonight is a special evening," he announced to the room with the satisfaction of a man who believes the outcome is already settled. "My daughter is about to make a decision that will define the next chapter of Whitfield Properties." Every face in the room turned toward me. I let the silence sit for just a moment before I spoke. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Tonight I am making a decision." Something shifted in his expression, barely visible, like a door closing an inch. I started from the beginning: the folder he had placed on his desk, the warning he had given me 3 weeks before Ethan disappeared, and then the garage, the 2 men in suits, the phone screen showing a video of a 5-year-old girl playing at recess without any idea she was being recorded. I said it all plainly, without drama, the way you speak when you no longer need anyone to believe you, because the facts are already documented. Across the room, a business partner's wife set her glass down without a sound. One of my uncles turned slowly to look at my father. Preston Cole dropped his eyes to his phone like a man searching for an exit. My father stood up. "You are making things up in front of everyone here. Diana Mercer is prepared to testify," I said, and I did not raise my voice. "And my attorney has everything on record." The room went completely still. Then, without a word, Gerald's oldest friend, Preston's father, folded his dinner napkin, placed it on the table, and walked out. Preston followed. Not because they believed every detail, but because they understood that this was no longer a family worth attaching their name to. I reached into my hand and slid the diamond ring off my finger, the one that had represented the Whitfield name for as long as I could remember, and set it gently on the oak table. "Keep the empire, Dad." My father's voice dropped low and final. "If you walk out that door tonight, you are no longer my daughter." I looked at him one last time, not with anger, not with grief, just with the clarity that comes when you finally see someone exactly as they are. "I know," I said. And I'm still leaving. I turned and walked out through the front doors and down the stone steps, the cold night air hitting my face as the sounds of the gathering faded behind me. Ethan was standing beside the car at the end of the drive, simple jacket, hair still a little long, eyes watching every step I took toward him. Let's go home, I said. He looked at me quietly. Where is that? Whatter is that? I smiled, the first real smile in 8 months. Wherever you and Sophia are. We got in the car, and in the back seat, Sophia was asleep with her cheek pressed against her old stuffed bear, hair falling across her face. I reached back and adjusted the blanket over her, then looked at Ethan, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt my shoulders drop and my breath come easy. My father built an empire with his bare hands, but the man he called an ordinary tradesman did something my father never could. He stayed, even when staying cost him everything he had.